If heaviness has wrapped around your chest without warning, if emotions flood you that feel borrowed from someone else, this isn't coincidence. It's connection speaking through silence. Somewhere in this world, a person whose soul once intertwined with yours is carrying weight they can't name. They don't understand why ordinary moments suddenly ache. They've convinced themselves they're healed, moved forward, closed that chapter. But healing isn't what's happening. Suppression is. And you're the current running beneath their carefully constructed calm. Not because you're trying to be, because authentic bonds don't dissolve. When proximity ends, they transform into something harder to ignore. Chapter 1. The Invisible Battle. They're fighting. Their suffering doesn't wear obvious clothing. It doesn't announce itself through tears or late-night messages or public displays of heartbreak. Instead, it shows up as tension in their shoulders, as restlessness they can't quite explain, as productivity that feels like running from something unnamed. From any external view, they appear functional, maybe even thriving, but internally, there's fragmentation, a split between the life they're building and the emotional truth they're avoiding. Psychology calls this cognitive dissonance. Philosophy calls it self-betrayal. Whatever the label, the result is the same. You can't outrun what you refuse to face. One version of them wants safety, predictability, control over outcomes. Another version remembers what it felt like to be genuinely seen by you. These two versions are locked in silent combat. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote about the necessity of having purpose. You became their why in ways they didn't consciously recognize. Now that you're absent, their psyche keeps circling back, asking questions logic can't answer. Why does this particular absence feel heavier? Why hasn't distance created the relief they expected? The more they attempt to erase you from their internal landscape, the deeper your imprint becomes. Avoidance doesn't weaken emotional memory, it intensifies it. You're not haunting them intentionally. You're simply the truth they haven't accepted yet. Chapter 2. Why your impact runs deeper than surface connection. Most people we encounter leave shallow marks. They're circumstantial, replaceable, bound by context. But certain souls don't just pass through our lives. They activate dormant chambers of the self. You didn't merely show up. You awakened something in them that had been sleeping. Perhaps it was emotional safety they'd never known. Perhaps it was permission to be unfiltered. Perhaps it was the shocking experience of being understood before explanations were needed. Ancient philosophers spoke of recognition, knowing a soul before meeting them. Whether interpreted through spirituality or psychology, the effect remains identical. Familiarity that defies logic. Real connections don't ask permission to stay. They simply refuse to leave. That's the source of their current struggle. They believed missing you would follow a predictable timeline. They expected busyness to override feeling. They thought rational thought could overpower emotional reality. But the nervous system learns patterns deeper than conscious choice. Your presence became neurologically paired with states of ease, clarity, authenticity. Once that pairing forms, forgetting requires more than willpower. This explains why random moments suddenly feel suffocating, why stillness becomes uncomfortable, why constant motion can't create the sense of forward movement they crave. You didn't wound them. You showed them something real, and real doesn't fade quietly. Chapter 3. The Private War Between Heart and Mind. There exists a particular form of suffering that emerges when someone refuses to acknowledge what moves through them. Your person inhabits this space now. They construct narratives designed to maintain control. It wasn't significant enough. It wouldn't have worked long term. I'm stronger without this. But emotion doesn't bow to storytelling. It bows to truth. Kierkegaard spoke of the agony of remembering futures that will never exist. That's their precise pain. They aren't just missing your physical presence, they're mourning the version of themselves that could only exist in your proximity. And here's what cuts deepest. They don't resent you for this disruption. They resent themselves because they recognize something rare and weren't prepared, courageous, or aligned enough to honor it. So the suffering continues privately with pride, sealing their lips. Chapter 4. The reciprocal nature of deep bonds. If you've experienced emotional waves that seem sourceless, you're not manufacturing symptoms. Profound emotional attunement creates reciprocal awareness, not mysticism, but psychological resonance. When two beings emotionally synchronize, separation doesn't immediately sever the thread. It echoes. It reverberates. This is why unexplained sadness visits you, why they surface in your thoughts during odd hours, why you sometimes feel pulled to reach out, then immediately want to retreat. You're not responsible for resolving their internal conflict. You're responsible for maintaining your own center. Marcus Aurelius taught that we control our minds, not external circumstances. Their growth path belongs to them. Your peace belongs to you. Sometimes the most powerful action is stillness, allowing truth to surface without force or interference. Chapter 5. The hidden curriculum of this season. This period is teaching them whether they acknowledge it or not. They're confronting emotional honesty, vulnerability, the true cost of avoidance. You became the catalyst, not necessarily for reunion, but for awakening. Some people return transformed, some grow in silence, some never speak again but carry you always. And that's acceptable because your purpose wasn't to be immediately chosen. It was to be felt so deeply they couldn't stay the same. Rumi knew that where ruin exists, treasure waits beneath. You were treasure they didn't know how to hold yet. If your person struggles because of you, it doesn't signal failure, it signals meaning. Not every profound connection culminates in togetherness, but every authentic one leaves transformation in its wake. Release any need for acknowledgement. Release any need to be selected. Your presence already completed its work. What's destined to return will find its way back. What's meant to remain already lives inside them. If these words resonated with something true inside you, know you've found your community. This channel, Psychology Wisdom, exists as sanctuary for emotional truth, intuition, and the psychology of bonds that transcend physical distance. Hit that like button if this spoke to you, and subscribe to explore what silence teaches, what absence reveals, and why certain connections never truly end. You're precisely where you need to be right now.